Yo, what up, guys? It's Flark, and welcome to a pretty unique video for this channel. I don't do content like this very often, or ever at all, one time, but I think we're in a pretty unique situation this time around. People generally know my channel as being guides and videos and theorycraft to milk the most power out of DK, no matter where our status is in the meta, whether we're above average or way above average or really good or really bad. I kind of just try and create a playstyle and talents and itemization comps and strats that will milk the most CR you can get out of DK, regardless of how good or bad it's perceived to be from the community. Because, the meta fluctuates very heavily, and changes come out, and buffs and nerfs come out, and when DK is ready to push, and you know all the details that you need to know, and you have that guide, you'll be ready to grind as much rating as you possibly can. And that's generally what I focus on. I don't dip my toes much in buffs and nerfs because the small selfish decisions that I would make as a result of my entire class knowledge being specifically around DK, these changes could directly influence the intricate web of balance in the meta, and have very unforeseen or unintended consequences as a result of the power increases or decreases that I would want specifically as a DK player. I really don't envy the task of being a game developer where almost every decision you make by default will be wrong in the eyes of the community. And no, I don't think that development on this game has been perfect. I understand it's a human-made game, and there definitely can be many mistakes. But multiple classes, multiple systems, soulbinds, conduits, powers, borrowed power for a PvE-centric game, all interlaced into a massive PvP meta. Every change you make has to perfectly be in line with all of the things that are as a result of the class and the comps they can play and the comps that they're weak to and good against, and what will change as a result of that one tuning decision. Though that's pretty tough. So I generally don't make buff or nerf videos. But yet here I am doing it anyway. So what changed? So apparently my content creation has more reach than I expected. And I try and stay super grounded with my decision making on what I think is actually valuable and what is actually a problem and what is totally not a problem, but for some reason it's said to be a problem. I don't buy it. So I think that I might have some valuable information that could be healthy and open-ended enough to, and maybe if this was shared enough, there is a minute microscopic chance that I could possibly influence game design or class design for DK in some way. I think once you get into the actual meat of this video, I'll touch your ICDK hearts with some of these changes that I'm proposing, because I think they might resonate with a lot of people. And also, like I said, the reason specifically I'm doing this now when DK's seen worse times before is because I think we're in a different situation. And I know that this is already a 4-minute Flark intro and we haven't said anything about buffs or nerfs yet that I'm proposing. But it's important to me, especially if this video does what I hope it will do, to be very thorough on my explanation of why I think we're in a different environment based on power of our class. So let me take you back real quick to BFA Season 1, as heartbreaking as that will be to some people. Azurite traits just introduced into the game. And there are so many of them, so many different classes and so many different traits for each classes, so many unique combinations of things that they can influence. And as a result, almost every class in a PvP setting can find a way to triple stack an Azurite trait to either create a torrent of damage in a small window or simply buff up one ability so much that it becomes a near one-shot. And every week they have to nerf it by 70 to 80% in PvP environments because of how much more important it is in PvP to be able to do a very high amount of damage in a very short window. And thus, regardless of their impact in PvE, they had to be nerfed in PvP specifically because of that problem. And eventually, there were so many different problems that they flat nerfed all traits by 50% in PvP for the rest of the entire expansion. And as a result, that we didn't have really those problems anymore because they couldn't quite get out of touch or out of hand when they were 50% nerfed. So now what kind of similarities do you see with Shadowlands here? Well, you have a lot of covenants for each class, legendaries, conduits, soulbinds, a bunch of mechanics that influence the power of your character, but so many different possibilities for combinations of all these mechanics that one of these combinations will end up being drastically overtuned in a PvP setting. But unlike BFA, you cannot do a 50% flat nerf to every Covenant ability, Soulbind, Legendary, and PvP, because some of our classes, it feels like, is incomplete without the Covenant abilities and all the Soulbinds and such that surround them, because the Borrowed Power is such a massive component of our class that a 50% nerf to everything, just to say, to heck with it, would unfortunately destroy certain classes to near unplayability. Not just it's bad, but its class doesn't work because that's too much of a blanket nerf, unlike traits, which were a less sizable portion of our class, but could be over-tuned at direct when it's all directed at one specific ability. So since we can't do that 50% nerf in PvP setting, and there's no PvP scaling, obviously, many people are very happy about that. We have everything going at 100% capacity. So like I said, one combination of all of these different mechanics tends to create something over the top for each class. Some examples: Ret, Warrior, Windwalker. I know you guys have all seen the Windwalker clip where somebody is erased from the game. The amount of time it takes you to blink. I know we've played against a red or two. Divine Toll hits pretty hard, I hear. Every comp that Warrior can play is S tier. These things are as a result of all of those combinations leading to an outcome that is overwhelming. So, that works, as we've seen with Mop, where the power level of everything is so high that nothing is really that powerful. Mop, it was because of CC, crowd control, really long windows of that, tons of utility, mobility, so much ability bloat, it was just over the top, but it was fun because blah, blah, blah. Now it's all kind of focused into one drastically overpowered ability, whether it be Bone Dust Brew or Kyrian Toll or any mechanic that gambles a one-shot out of thin air. But maybe it's not quite as fun for some. Regardless, that's not what this video is going to be about. It's not going to be a critique on the borrowed power system of Shadowlands, but the current state of DK in that meta, because all I play is DK, and that's what I know. And as a result of DK having 3 completely trash covenants in PvP, Kyrian, Venthyr, Night Fae, they're all completely unusable. No matter how much I've tried to make them work, they don't work. We only have Necrolord, and we only have AoE stun because it's effectively, in this meta, a requirement of our class to be able to do that. We don't have millions of combinations that eventually lead to the perfect one that's overwhelming and over the top. We have a setup that we have to run, And whatever power level that setup is, that is the power level that we are in this meta. And right now we are good, right? We're good. Don't be ridiculous. I'm not so naive to think that DK is bad. There's a 3k DK on ladder. Congratulations to him. We are good. But I think we're good in a meta where there's good, very good, super good, Omega Supreme good, Omega Supreme Deluxe good, Warrior, right? So being good in this meta as a result of all of the things in my long-winded introduction is probably not good enough. Okay. So now I'm going to talk about what I think we can do to change that. Remember, this is why I wanted to make a video with this, because I believe that unlike other metas where tuning passes can be done to just, a little percentage here, percentage there, especially in Legion when everything was so tight, you can make a very balanced system. I think now we're in a mop era where you need a class to be really dang good to fit in with the classes that can do these crazy things. So I'm going to make timestamps so you can skip all of what I just said if what you really care about is what I propose. And we'll start with Frost. Timestamp for everything that I discuss here coming up. Frost needs a spender. Most spenders in this game are very powerful. Here's our spender. It's been in the game since DK was released. Here it is. It's trash. Froststrike does nothing. It is so weak that I have looked at my meters and the opposing DK's meters, in case you think that I am poo-poo and I'm just not pressing it enough, for so many hundreds of games through this expansion. And it is not used more than Deathstrike. It is just better to do your entire burst rotation, ignore Froststrike entirely, and then spam Deathstrike when you're in trouble, or just taking any damage at all to keep yourself topped so you're never a possible target. Froststrike, one of the core mechanics of our class, is not situationally better than just doing your A-bomb limb, rhyme to obliterate because you get rhyme procs in every burst situation in threes. Free rhyme procs that hit AoE and obliterates that hit really hard means Froststrike truly is not part of your burst rotation. Iconically, one of your most powerful abilities, now not part of your rotation. That is including two-hander and dual wield, of which nobody plays dual wield. But dual wield actually has a very similar problem in a PvP environment. Now, if you're completely unfocused and you're playing in twos, it can do some damage. But as a spender, I don't think its ideal situation being some damage is very good. So I don't, unfortunately, have a really good PvP-centric fix for this. I don't think buffing it in PvP specifically is good, and I don't know how problematic it would be if Froststrike was buffed for a PvE standpoint. So I'm going to preface this by saying I'm going to throw out a lot of what I think would be particularly valuable information, most of it entirely PvP-centric, which means it'll focus on PvP modifiers and PvP talents, but some of it PvE-centric, because I really think that it will bring our class design back to a better place. And if it's possibly going to damage PvE in some way, I'm going to try and make it fit into PvE talents in such a way, or less impactful in such a way that it might be useful if PvEers are saying the same thing. So if my thoughts line up with PvEers' thoughts, then maybe it will be valuable information. Anyway, Froststrike could use more damage, more output, period. A percentage damage increase. But that's kind of boring. And I don't want to just overload it so much that it's powerful because we just buff it if I say some obscene number like 80%. So maybe a flatline damage buff to Froststrike. But they also said they were going to be looking at talents, underplayed and undervalued talents in 9.1.5. And that is where I can shine with this buff video or proposed changes video, because I know what the heck we're not using in PvP, and I'm hoping that some of these talents overlap in PvE. One of them is this one. This one is worthless and has never been touched since its release, and PvP, it is trash. And there is a talent from Legion that was on this row that perfectly combines with a Frost Strike buff that would, in tandem with a damage buff, add another way for our spender to feel impactful, but it requires both a talent and a little bit of a drawback. Because if you remember, Shattering Strikes from Legion fit right on this row, and it increased the damage of your spender by a great amount while consuming Razor Eye stacks to do it. So you would have to pick a talent. That talent would have to have already been tested in the history of the game and be very valuable and balanceable. And you would have to spend a Razor Eye stack. So it's not just, I want Frost Strike to do 20k damage. It's a sizable buff, perhaps, to its base damage ability, then a talent plus Razor Ice consumption, and you've got Shattering Strikes, Frost Strike. And now all of a sudden, with those two changes, you may go from, my spender is worthless and I hate pressing it, and there's no decision between Death Strike and Frost Strike, because I would just press Death Strike at any time I was taking any damage at all, because Frost Strike does nothing, to, I have some decisions, my spender feels good, just from those two changes. And it coincides with perhaps a design philosophy that they were going to take for 9.1.5, where maybe talents that were completely unusable would see some changes. I know Unholy has some of those. Gargoyle, I'm looking at you, right? And we'll get to the Unholy section soon. So, proposed changes so far: Frost Strike, damage buff, Icy Talon switches to the Legion Shattering Strikes talent in this first row. This is exactly where it was, and it does still fit there. These are all single target oriented talents. It fits right there. I think that's a grounded, reasonable change that's not asking for anything obscene. This row is all about rune generation. Horn of Winter is underplayed, but I'm not going to touch that. I don't think it's that important for this row to see much changes. Rune generation is actually a huge power of Frost, so keep that the same. Death's Reach has not seen any play in PvP since its inception. In PvE, I think it's useful for manipulating ads on mythic fights. If PvEers don't have a problem with this leaving, I think it is a very mundane talent, and it's the questing one, killing an enemy that yields experience or honor, blah, blah, blah. Those talents, I think, are very boring. And while maybe if they're just a filler talent and they just didn't have any ideas there, that's one thing. But I think Hungering Cold, the old DK ability, fits extremely well here. Hungering Cold would be like a 7-second incapacitate, which seems like a ton until you realize there's a 5-second instant CC right here. I mean, right here, there's a 5-second instant CC. That's 2 more seconds. But remember, Hungering Cold was like that cast time and activation. It would be a little bit unique to blind for that reason, but it would be very powerful as a CC option in our toolkit rather than just a setup tool for stun, because 7 seconds is so long. It's kind of like an AoE trap. I think it's just a lot more interesting than Death's Reach, and I'm certain that it's not like an auto pick, because remember, this is an instant 5-second CC with a slow attached to it. So it could even have like maybe a slightly shorter cooldown, maybe 50 seconds, maybe it just stays a minute. I think that's very balanceable in this row. Frozen Pulse, I believe, should be pillar activated and do a lot more damage. I think, as I'll get into in a second, Ice Cap is not perfectly ideal in PvE and is trash in PvP, completely unusable. So having more things that work around pillar would actually both be more impactful for this talent as a whole, because it'd be more burst oriented, and also it would make Ice Cap more valuable, so you're not shoehorned into exactly one talent in a PvP setting, which is true. Nobody has swapped off this since the expansion release 10 months ago. So yeah, Frozen Pulse would activate on pillar with the same conditional requirement, but only on pillar, and it would just do a lot more damage as a result of being on an ability with a cooldown. So I think that's just right now it's a select and forget talent in PvP. It was never picked, but if it was picked, you would never think about it. It's not like you're like, oh crap, I have to stay below 3 runes, because it is 2% of your damage in PvP at most. There is no way you are going to alter your playstyle around 197 frost damage to all nearby enemies pre-modifiers. So it is a click it and then never think about it again ability, which I think we just have a lot of. Murderous Efficiency, Inexorable Assault. This row, very, very bad in PvP. It's almost like all of our PvE talents add tiny little, completely forgettable chip additions to our class, which I just don't think is very good. It makes sense on this row because Avalanche is during Rhyme Proc, so it's more burst-centric. Frozen Pulse doing Pillar would be a different type of burst-centric. It wouldn't be too samey, wouldn't be too similar. You don't get any more Rhyme Procs during Pillar. I think that's just a really powerful addition, and like I said, synergizes well with Ice Cap. One more good idea. Permafrost. Very boring, super passive, terrible in every meta except for a dampening meta, and dampening metas tend to be a little boring, and we're not going to probably have any in Shadowlands. And it's just, like I said, very, very passive, uninteresting. In a row that has some interesting actives, I think Permafrost is just out of place and just kind of a filler talent. When I think Mirror Ball would be perfect for this row. Mirror Ball from Legion again. Great expansion. Loved it. Loved a lot of the design choices. Very unique. It's survivability focused. So Mirror Ball reflects, if you guys don't know, you guys can look at the Legion version of the things that I say, Shattering Strikes, Mirror Ball, if you want to. But what it did was reflect. It took off all of the harmful debuffs on you. As long as you could use AMS, you could remove everything that was on you as a harmful magical effect just by pressing it. So that included roots, but it didn't mean you could get out of a poly because you can't use AMS in a poly. You can only use AMS to prevent a poly. But you can use AMS in a root, so it actually removed the roots off of you. But it was also really good because your AMS wouldn't get just melted by dots that were already on you. It would remove mind games off you, so you could AMS and then Death Strike immediately after. It's very, very good survivability tool. Extremely powerful. But AMS is already a good survivability tool, so it's not like over the top. Because if you're pressing AMS, you'll probably live. So now it's like you're pressing AMS, you'll definitely live. It's not like this would just be, oh, that's so powerful. They would be unkillable. Because you already press AMS and get a ton of survivability against these comps where it would matter. So it's just like a much better designed talent, I think, for this row, and a possible root break. But if you're using AMS to break roots, remember that means you're using AMS aggressively, which means you can get punished by Maledicts or Mind Games. So definitely not over the top. There was nothing over the top about it. And you would have to select it as a talent over Wraithwalker Death Pact. I think mobility is not something that we have overwhelming, oppressive amounts of. So I think as a result, I would buff Wraithwalk to 45 seconds. Because if you're using this to get out of roots, and it's a 1 minute cooldown of AMS, then you wouldn't really use Wraithwalk to get out of roots and get a sprint. I don't think that's that useful. And like I said, Wraithwalk is not overpowered at all. So having it be 45 seconds might actually, more frequent root break, more frequent sprint, but you can't even do anything in this sprint, and everybody's going to be like, oh no, I can't get this DK off me. He sprints for 4 seconds, but no, he hit me 3 seconds later and it canceled, and I rerouted him and now he's sad. Like, nobody's going to be complaining about that, so buffing Wraithwalk from 1 minute to 45 seconds I think would be really powerful in this row to combat the similarity problems of Mirror Ball and Wraithwalk. Death Pact, in this meta, I mean, you could probably make that 15% healing absorption. Sometimes the 50% maximum health with no debuff wouldn't have saved me. We're talking Ret and Windwalker games. I press it and I'm immediately re-dead, even before I could get another heal. Right? Death Strike, with the amount of burst that's in the game, every time I press Death Strike, it's probably Death Pact. This is a last resort. I have nothing left. I'm praying to live through a jungle CC chain. And most of the time, it does nothing. Most of the time, because of its healing absorption, it does nothing. Some of the time, even if it had no healing absorption, it would do nothing. And it's on a 2 minute cooldown. So longer than most panic heals in the game, with a huge drawback that gets even worse in dampening. It becomes almost unusable because the maximum health heal is reduced by dampening, but the healing absorption is not reduced by dampening. So eventually in dampening, pressing this ability makes you weaker than have you not pressed it. So yeah, I think 15%, maybe 10 would be fine in this meta. Maybe it wouldn't be fine in 10.0.1, but we're in Shadowlands right now, and I think Death Pact is just... It's just a little insulting that Death Pact is in the game right now. I press Death Strike for 60% heals sometimes because of how much raw damage in this is in the game. Having a 2-minute cooldown with a 50% health and a 30%, it's just insulting. I think this should be 15, 10, maybe 0. I don't think 0 would work thematically with the ability. So let's say 15. Let's say 15 to be a healthy, trying to reduce DK bias, because I really do care about the integrity of a video like this. 15% is my proposal for Death Pact, and that's what I want with that row. This row, I think Glacial Advance should be a cone. Again, remember, I'm working at PvE talents, but I'm trying, watch how I try and avoid changes that would drastically impact PvE. I know I'm not perfect about it. That's why I was hoping that my ideas for design could coincide in some way with PvEers' ideas for things that they would want with the Froststrike proposals. But most of them, Death's Reach, this row, very utility, maybe PvP-centric. This row, very PvP-centric. And now Glacial Advance. I want it to be a cone. Not a straight shot line down, let's just take a look at it. There hasn't been a lot of visual aid in this. Can I even generate enough runic power to use this? It's, what it is, right? It's kind of like that, but smaller. I wish I was next to a dummy. I want this thing off my bar. It makes me sick to look at it. It's like that, but just like a small line right out from your character. Little ice spikes coming up here. Very clunky in PvP. Truly unusable. Nobody's ever used it. It's not a ranged frost strike. It's a clunky skill shot that does hardly any damage on a pretty short cooldown, but like I said, very underused. Mez tried it once with a Fallen Crusader build. I don't think it won him any games. I think he won games because he's Mez and he's insane, but I don't think this ability needs to be a line. I think it's extraordinarily clunky in PvP and completely underused, and I don't think making it a cone, like I said, would be much of a PvE problem. I don't think this is very used in PvE either, and a cone would just make it affect more enemies more of the time, and PvP would actually make it reliable and consistent, especially with some of the pathing problems that you face in PvP. A little line that bolts out from your character like this is a huge problem in a PvP environment. With mobility creep and pathing the way that it is, this ability is not good. So just a cone for Glacial Advance, and maybe a slight damage buff if that doesn't affect PvEers at all. It's a really cool ability, and I would love like an AoE Frost Strike range that's not that oppressive at all, because it's very low damage, but that would just be a neat thematic spender. And I think if Frost Strike was buffed, especially with Shattering Strikes, it would have to be buffed as well, but that's one more idea that I have for Frost. And finally, I'm not going to touch this row. I think my proposed change with Ice Cap and Frozen Pulse synergy could be enough. I think Ice Cap is horrible in PvP, but I think it's a lot closer in PvE. So I'll let that, if they make it 1 second more to make it very competitive in PvE, maybe that would be really cool. I don't know if that's something possible. So I'm going to leave this row behind. Again, Obliteration is extraordinarily impactful for us and important. So I'll just leave this row alone. And that's all of the design space that I believe could change heavily in PvP without affecting PvE as much as somebody who just says, yeah, scrap this, redesign the whole thing, buff this to 500%. Like, I'm trying to avoid doing that. So finally, I would like to take a look at the PvP talent rework from Frost. And and make some modifications now that we've had 2 to 3 months of testing this stuff. And I can actually know, because believe me, I wanted to give advice when this stuff was still in production. My advice was actually asked for, but it is so hard. No matter how much you think or act or test, even if you went on the PTR and went into the BGs and said, here's what I think, it doesn't matter. You need hundreds of games against 2,800, 2,900, 3K tournament players playing at the very best of their ability to have any clue on what these talents are like. No amount of PTR battleground hunting, messy PvP is going to give you actual information on this stuff, ever. So regardless of how much effort I put into PTR or theory crafting I did beforehand or optimism that I showed about these PvP talents, it's all not going to matter. I have to be able to test it. Everybody does. You have to. In the actual environment that comes as a result of constant ladder play and trying to grind, what do these PvP talents do? And now I think I have some ideas. So here are some proposed changes. 1, Shroud of Winter, which I'm hovering over right now. I've never played it to any meaningful effect. I think 30% is not good enough. I think considering the pacing of the meta and the tools that some people have, and the fact that these ranged classes like Mage and Shadow Priest that you might use this on don't get punished at all for their positioning against DKs. I mean, let's face it. How many times do you see Mage double blink, poly, DB, poly, we win, Kabus, we win. Shadow Priests can freely move around the map. They play with a warrior. They're so tanky. They have Intervene, they have Rally, they have Kyrian Spirit Appeal, they have Fade and Disperse and Void, Torrent, Pools, Spam Coiling you. I'm not saying Shadow Priest is overpowered, but the classes that you would use this against, you can't punish them for slight changes in their positioning. I mean, that's all this talent does, is slightly force your opponent out of position. And this meta is not the type of meta where you can capitalize on something like that, especially spending a PvP talent for it. So, with that said, and the fact that with hundreds of games and watching other DK streamers, other ladder play of this PvP talent, I can say that nobody cares that it exists. So, 50% probably might not even still see play, but there's no way I'm going any crazier than that. So 50% I think is a reasonable number for Shroud of Winter. Deathchill has been changed so many times. I see how hard they're working to try and make this a viable talent. I think all they should do is one last tinker, is make it so that when you apply Deathchill, you don't remove or consume the Chains of Ice debuff. Yeah, if they're chains, they're generally not moving unless they have a break. So if they break Deathchill or break Chains of Ice, that's no different. And applying Deathchill required 2 runes instead of 1. So I really, really don't think that Deathchill should consume the Chains of Ice debuff on them. Even with this minor change, I don't think it's going to see much play. But it's just something that shouldn't happen. And it's a really minor change. It's just a part of how the ability functions. I just don't think it should remove Chains of Ice when you apply Deathchill. So currently, right, you chain somebody like this guy, and you chains them again. It applies a root to them, and the Chains of Ice debuff falls off, even if the Chains of Ice debuff would have had more time after Deathchill is applied. That's all I'm saying. That also is... actually, we'll just stop it there. Deathchill, that's my change. Delirium is fine. I wish that it affected more things. Unfortunately, it's extraordinarily hard to tell what this actually affects, but I know that not every thing that speeds up your character is considered a movement enhancing ability for some reason. I think just everything that speeds up your character, steed, sprint, movement abilities like roll and blink, they should all be affected. It says movement enhancing. Sprint and steed definitely fit that category. Tiger Dash, anything that makes you move faster or actually moves your character by itself. That's what it says, and I think that's what it should do. I'm certain that it doesn't do that to all abilities right now, but I can't ask for a list. I know that's very, very, very far away from their their important tasks right now is a list of spells that Delirium affects, but that's what I think should be changed with Delirium. Dead of Winter. This is a really very, very thought out one. This is close to my heart. I really think this is a good idea. I think it should increase Remorseless Winter's damage. I understand why it has to still increase the cooldown, because giving them a 20-second AoE stun is not something you can add to the game right now. That's oppressive. That's ridiculous. So they had to increase the cooldown to account for the fact that it stuns them. But Remorseless Winter does almost no damage in PvP. It is a forget button in PvP. To the point where even when you have Gathering Storm, you don't even really run Everfrost in PvP, which is one of the most powerful conduits that Frost DK has for AoE, because Remorseless Winter is just such a non-button press. It's only a 20% slow. It's not a lockdown ability. It's not a utility ability, and it doesn't do high damage in a PvP environment. Hundreds of games of testing confirms that this is just not a high damaging ability. So also increasing it to a 45-second cooldown makes it effectively worthless and just an AoE stun. But like I said, we're not culprits in the meta of being overwhelmingly high damage. This ability does nothing. Just making it say Remorseless Winter's cooldown is increased by 25 seconds and increases the damage dealt by Remorseless Winter by some amount makes total sense. That way we're not sacrificing anything to use it damage-wise. When Remorseless almost does no damage as a result, maybe then you could Gathering Storm with an AoE stun and the damage component for Dead of Winter and Everfrost could actually make Remorseless Winter feel like a 45-second cooldown. So, yeah. I mean, I think this one's a no-brainer, only because, like I said 10 times now, Remorseless Winter is negligible for damage in a PvP environment. So this would not harm anything. I can't. It's so obvious what I'm saying, so I really hope that that's I hope that that's something that we all agree with. Dome is great. Keep Dome the way it is. Death's Echo, I'm not going to touch because it's weird, and I'm not going to mess with a weird PvP talent. Bitter Chill, I think should be 10 or even 12%. I understand that it was tested and got nerfed from 12 to 8%. But that was not, I don't think that was correct. I think that its impactfulness at 8% is actually shockingly low. And even the Frost Strike refreshes the duration with how many things you have to do and how many globals we have to spend during our burst, and how terrible Frost Strike is to even press in the first place. I don't actually end up thinking that does too much. I just don't think 8% is that impactful. I think that 10% is probably the conservative choice, and 12%, I swear to God, that's where it could be, considering the power of things like Rat Warrior, Warrior Windwalker, everything that's not us. So yeah, I would say 10% is my conservative suggestion, but I don't see why 12% can't be in the game. Maybe it would help stop Ret from one-shotting everybody on your team. Or if it didn't, they would do it slightly slower, and it would inconvenience them, and making a Ret mad would be a nice thing for a change. Finally, they would have to fix spell warding. I'm sorry I don't have any more information onto why this ability has been bugged since release. I wish I could help in some way, but all I know is that yeah, it still applies even when you don't have it. If they fix that and then buff these things that I'm asking for, I'm actually also calling for effectively a hard nerf, because right now, all the time, we have 3.5 or 4 PvP talents, and we're still not hyper tournament viable and very underrepresented on the ladder, right? So imagine if they just fix Spellwarden and didn't do any of the other things that I was talking about. That would be a real slap in the face. So there you go. Those are my proposed Frost changes. I really thought hard about those things to be... Everything kind of feels like it has a purpose. Dead of Winter. Well, why would you do that? Oh, because it increases the cooldown, and because Remorseless sucks in PvP, and it'd be killing 2 birds with 1 stone, and making that actually feel like a more impactful ability press, and people love to press impactful abilities. Frost Strike changes with... Shattering Strikes, you would remove Icy Talons, which is extraordinarily boring, and give us back something that makes our ability press feel more impactful. I pray that these are not overlooked or ignored, because they're not just cries to make our class overpowered, but really directly addressing the things that I believe people enjoy while thinking about it in a competitive and meta-based and tuning-based perspective. My prayers are with that's the case. So there's another spec for DK. It's called Unholy. It has pets and stuff. I have less ideas for Unholy, but I have some ideas. Unholy actually has a lot more talent, both PvP and PvE talent customization. So I think Unholy could actually be in a very good place. But I believe there are one or two changes that we could do, especially to some forgotten rows that would help bring back some of the iconic nature and fun choices of Unholy without sacrificing anything, because these are problems in both PvP and PvE. So let me address those real quick before I let you guys go. Thank you again for giving me so much of your time if you actually are this far. Let's start. Unlike Frost, where I kind of reworked from start to finish, we're going to pick out a few on Unholy, because like I said, it's very, very high customization in both PvP talents and PvE talents, so I don't think I have to do too much. But look at this guy. This guy's been, he's down bad. He's been neglected for a while. He's in a rough spot. This talent is worthless in PvP and worthless in PvE. It should just be hyper buffed. I mean, if it's really good in PvE, very competitive, that's not a bad thing. It's a cool mechanic with runic power dump. And if it's competitive in PvE, it will actually be competitive in PvP too, because if you can find a way to build this thing up enough in PvP environment, then becomes a burst ability, which are always better in PvP, even if they don't seem like if they're a little clunky or not that usable. If you can focus enough damage into this thing, the last few hits at the end of the 30-second duration will be very hard, allowing you to, kind of like Tyrant for demo locks, set up a situation where you can set up all your damage and then use some more of your damage at the later end of Gargoyle, and then stun to silence them at the end of Gargoyle, and you have the most high impact part of your cooldown coinciding with your CC, and you can set up those windows of high burst. That is awesome. And completely not how it is now, because it's trash and uncompetitive. So just buff this talent. This is my first change that I believe that they will actually do. I wish they would do all this stuff for Frost, but that might take more time, or they might neglect it because the name of a talent has to be changed or whatnot. But this can be done. Gargoyle should be buffed heavily to be very competitive in PvE, and then that dream situation that I talked about in PvP could actually be an impactful burst window and give Unholy more value in twos, because single target damage is so valuable in twos, and if you can kill somebody in a stun silence at the end of Gargoyle, then you can win more twos games. That's change number one. Change number two is right here. This ability is dumb, boring, and stupid, and ugly, and I don't like its shoes. I don't know why this exists. Nobody will ever choose Unholy Pact, anything but Unholy Pact for this row ever, unless they're doing shenanigans with Night Fae, which again, too clunky to work in the pacing of this over-the-top meta. But this is unreal. I think that this one would be hard to balance from a PvE setting, because this PvE row of AoE burst would have massive ramifications if I made this even remotely viable in PvP. But I hope that they look at this talent maybe to remove the cap, I think what happens is every tick of D&D can apply at most 1 wound. I don't know why that's the case, because I think even if that couldn't happen, it would still not be picked in PvE. Again, PvEers can correct me on this. Maybe starting there would be a great thing. It still wouldn't see any value in PvP, but it's possible that if it was tuned in a way, if that's a change and it was tuned in a way that it would be valuable in PvE, then it could be a good source of wound generation, which really matters with necrotic wounds, which I'll be getting to in just a second. So, like I said, these talents are trash in PvE, so I'm hoping that both of my ideas here, even though they're not much of anything besides tune it better or buff it in damage, I mean, you don't need more of an idea than make this do more damage. It just has to do more damage, baseline. And then the buffs will make it compound much quicker. Anyway, I think the last thing here, again, just PvE and PvPers could agree, this needs to be buffed. Maybe, God, I don't want to use a number here because, again, the sims that would drastically change as a result of a number directly affecting a PvE talent is scary, but 20%, 25%, maybe some actual rot pressure as a form of unholy would be really good. So far, Ebon Fever, and it would make that conduit more valuable. Let's say 25% for Ebon Fever could be very valuable. But now I'm going to move over to where I feel more comfortable. PvP talents. And these I have some very good ideas that I believe everybody should agree with. I'll start with one that's so agreeable that we'll all just take a breath of unified duh together. Life and Death should not have an internal cooldown on the heal. It literally only procs off of hots, so it only grabs 5% of a hot heal and then goes on internal cooldown over and over and over. It rapid fires that internal cooldown on a hot. So you're getting healed for 20 every time this thing procs. It's like 20 HPS from a PvP talent. It's so sad. RBGs, nigh invulnerability in RBGs is one thing. Maybe make it 3%, but just remove the internal cooldown altogether, because that first paragraph is so misleading. It says when targets afflicted by your virulent plague are healed, you are also healed by 5% of that amount. That's actually a really cool situational PvP talent in RBGs where you don't want to die or never be a potential target, especially if you're pushing in to do grip knocks or something similar. Maybe you're just the designated target caller and you want to push in and you want to play aggressive. That's a cool PvP talent. But that first line is a total lie. It doesn't do that at all. It should say, when a target afflicted by your virulent plague is affected by a hot, heal yourself for 20 and then slap yourself in the face for ever choosing this thing. That is frustrating. That's not how it should work. Life and Death needs to have the internal cooldown removed entirely. And if you really think Unholy DKs would be immortal gods from your testing with that talent without an internal cooldown, then just make the percentage lower. But don't give me 20 heals. That's insulting. Necrotic wounds, I think, could be 3 stacks or 4 stacks and 7.5% on each. Then an APOC will be max stacks, and that will make it feel like a very, very reliable Mortal Strike. Because remember, you got rid of Necrotic Strike for this. So yes, it's cool to have a Mortal Strike effect that stacks with other ones. And that's very, very impactful for Unholy actually finally seeing some use in today's ladder play. Not a lot, but it does have some real single target pressure, truly. But I think just having it, if it's going to replace the most iconic effect of Unholy for a long history of this game, in PvP environments, it should absolutely be pretty much just press it, get it maxed up, and go. Reset, press it, maxed out, and go. APOC should immediately get it up there. It should just be like, APOC should immediately start this window of bursts and Mortal Strike and pressure. I think 4 and 7.5% would probably make more sense of just being a real grinder, roddy kind of thing. And as one more change, I think I was going to add this to my list of changes, but no, this is supposed to be a meme PvP talent. There's no way we're supposed to want this to be competitive because it requires a rune, which means if it was competitive and it's spammable, then our playstyle would just be throwing out zombies that explode on people and stuff. It would just... This is a meme talent, and it's supposed to be like that. I'm not going to even touch it. But Necro's Bargain, I just don't think drawbacks are what we need right now. 45-second reduction is a huge reduction. And then Creeped Fever instead of ghouls is kind of weird. I think maybe... Ooh... I don't think you have the cooldown reduction. I think it still summons ghouls and applies Crypt Fever. So instead of having a drawback, it's still kind of that heavy burst ability. Maybe buff Crypt Fever a fair amount in duration and damage. So, okay. Final thing. So I'm going to make sure it's really thorough. I'm going to stop saying maybe and I'm going to propose a solution. Watch this. Necro Bargain no longer reduces by 45 seconds. That's a huge nerf to the effect. But it still applies ghouls. So that's a big buff to the effect. But now it's just a PvP talent that applies Crypt Fever. That's kind of mundane. How can we make Crypt Fever more of a standalone effect? Well, we can buff the damage, extend the duration. So it is more likely that someone will reset this with heals. And even though it's a longer duration, which means it's doing less damage, you just pump up that damage a little bit to maybe like 10%, 12% of their maximum health over 6 seconds, maybe 8 seconds. But it will refresh more often because of that longer duration, and people will have to cast healing spells, making it really actually feel like a single target rot ability instead of a weird drawback, fast APOC, Crypt Fever can sometimes do absolutely nothing mess of jarbled, nonsensical. Clearly, what Crypt Fever is supposed to do is punish a heal, maybe add more rot to the spec. I think that making it applied so easily is silly with the 45-second cooldown. I think it should just be a more impactful period. So what my proposed changes will do will be add more burst and single target rot, which people said they really love about Unholy, to our burst window, to Apocalypse, without having that crazy 45-second reduction, making it so it really can't ever be that powerful because it's up pretty much permanently with Army of the Damned and that reduction. And also without having that drawback as a result of that. So it still can, even if the Crypt Fever falls off, you still can do the regular APOC burst. I really, really like that idea. I really like the idea of just having it do more damage, but over a longer period of time. So it's not going to do massive hits, but it's kind of like that exactly what we're looking for out of Unholy, right? Rot. Rotty, sustain. It would be small damage, but over a long period of time. If they healed into it, it reset. It would keep piling on that damage, and eventually it would burn them out of cooldowns. They would lose a lot of mana, maybe a defensive, maybe just they would fall behind because of that massive single target potential. And that's my final suggestion. I really like that Necromancer's Bargain one. I hope that there's Unholy DKs out there that are all nodding their heads. If there is one of you, if there's just one of you, please say in the comments that you're also down with that Necro Bargain suggestion. I swear that's my best idea I've had tonight. And it's a PvP talent, which means it affects nothing else besides PvP, which is what I do. I'm trying my hardest to avoid affecting PvE, but just another full PvP talent rework was not going to help. So I needed to combine some of the core mechanics of the spec with some of the PvP mechanics that modify it. I know that Gargoyle is a good idea. Gargoyle is trash in PvE. It should be buffed. Okay, guys. You've been with me for an hour, I'm sure. Every Flark video has to be an hour. It's just a rite of passage by now. But if any of this touches you in some way and you're like, oh, yeah, that is something that we should add, Share this around. Comment on what actual abilities you think that I addressed the most properly, and maybe we'll go from there. Maybe we'll talk, have a conversation. I will respond to comments below and have a conversation on what really, really impactful things, like you're like, oh yeah, I really hate blah, blah, blah. Yes, I really want my button presses to feel more impactful. Yes, Frost Strike is a spender. It just does not feel good to me. Yeah, I really think that bargain change addresses one of the things that I feel like Unholy has just been missing from the play style, the feel of that roddy, single target, grindy nature. Yeah. I hope that this can provide some valuable insight from somebody who obsesses over this class all day, every day for a living. Blizzard, if you're out there, I am really good at having conversations about this class. I pray that this came across the right way, and I hope that everybody can find something, a point of discussion, a point of perhaps conflict, maybe understanding that we could talk about in the comments and get to the real way we can develop a healthy, happy DK for everybody. Okay. Peace out, guys. Thank you for watching my stuff. I love you. Goodbye.